And I was really, really impressed about the U-shaped valleys and the winding tributaries along the floor of the valley, and the very primitive people that would live, say, up around the 10,000 foot level on the edges of the valley. I couldn't see Mount Everest. It was over in this corner, just a little bit out of our sight. But again, as the title implies, we were sent over there because there had been stories that there was an enemy radio station, homing station, that was luring our cargo planes off course and causing them to let down in the wrong place toward landing, in case they were in the clouds and were flying on instruments, could not see the ground. It was causing our cargo planes to crash into these Himalayan mountains of Tibet. So we were sent in there to see if we could find that station. Well, we never did find it. And in fact, I hate to tell you, but I kind of think that that was a boondoggle. It was a colonel that came out and said, "I want your airplane, and would I like to fly as his co-pilot?" And I said, "Yes, yes, sir." And off we went. And I think he had all of his buddies aboard. There were 10 people aboard that airplane, which was designed for 6. And there weren't enough oxygen outlets for everybody. Of course, the pilot and I had our own oxygen, all we wanted, but the rest of the people had to share oxygen. And I think they said they all had terrible headaches that night when we got back. But anyway, we flew as far as we could up the valley until it was so narrow we were afraid we couldn't turn around. And so we came back. One thing a pilot has to worry about is something called a high altitude stall. That if you make too sharp a turn, the airplane's liable to go into a stall condition and make a dive toward the ground. So you had to be careful that you made just a gentle turn, and that required a whole lot more room than if you just banked the thing up and made a quick turnaround. So those are little things we had to think about. Okay, another thing we did was drop propaganda leaflets on the Burmese. And we were trying to get the Burmese to come over to our side. Okay, this pilot artist friend of mine did a lot of artwork, and I've always liked that one because it shows an irate pilot shaking his fist at those naughty Japanese down there for having the audacity to shoot at him. Obviously these are anti-aircraft shells going by, and he's out there shaking his fist. "No, you can't do that to me." It shows that even though combat conditions can be very tense, well, we all had to keep a sense of humor. There was a lot of that going on all the time. Just try not to dwell on the serious problems, but try to keep your sense of humor. Oh, my scariest mission was my very first. We were sent, again, I was flying as co-pilot that day. We were sent over to central Burma to bomb an airfield, which we did. We turned and started coming back home. And all of a sudden I looked out my window and I saw a whole lot of airplanes, and they were not ours. We had a formation of 9 B-25s that day, and our airplane was what they called tail end Charlie at the very end of the flight. And we were flying an airplane that had previously made a belly landing and had to be repaired so it could be put back in shape again. So we were the slowest airplane, and we, as soon as our lead pilot saw these enemy airplanes down there, well, he pushed his throttles forward and away he went. But it left us behind because we had the slowest airplane, and I guess he didn't know, he, the lead pilot, did not know that we were back there. We tried to say something on the radio, but there was so much chatter on the radio that you couldn't hear anything at all. So anyway, here we were, left behind, tail end Charlie, and this big swarm of Japanese airplanes were coming up, flying the same direction we were, and every few minutes I'd look out my window and they'd be a little closer to us and closer to our elevation, our altitude. And so pretty soon one of the gunners called up and said, "Sir, there's a Japanese fighter plane down here doing slow rolls right beneath our plane, and I can't get a shot at him. And what do I do? Well, I don't know. I didn't have any answer for him. So pretty soon, well, this Japanese plane came alongside us, and this obviously was something that I took out of a book years later, because I found out that that particular enemy airplane, called an Oscar, was the one that was stationed at that particular Japanese base at that particular time, and these were the very markings on those planes that were stationed there. So this is what I saw as I looked out my window to the right, and I could see the silhouette of the pilot, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, there's a guy who's probably had the very same training I've had. He's probably had a couple of years of college like I did, and he probably comes from a good family. He's been well trained, and he's out there doing the job for his country that I've been told to do for my country. And it gives you a very strange feeling. Also, it gave me I was really scared to death, no kidding. I just figured, well, we're not going to get out of this one. And our gunner evidently couldn't get a bead on him, couldn't get him in his gun sight. So nobody fired a shot one way or the other. Eventually they left. But I did have one feeling that I felt that, well, in life, sometimes there are things worth worrying about and things that are not worth worrying about. And I think I finally saw the difference, that was indeed something worth worrying about. I've tried to follow that all the rest of my life, and I think it's worked pretty well for me. Anyway, the enemy planes finally went away. I'm not sure why, except they must have known that we had radio operators aboard, and you can bet your life that those guys are sending the message back to India, you better get your fighter planes in the air right now, because here they come. Or maybe he thought that we were just a decoy out there, and his job was to protect his bombers, not to go out looking for a fight somewhere. Okay, another thing we volunteered for, they wanted somebody to volunteer for a single plane raid to go way up into the northern part of Burma and attack the enemy supplies up where those Japanese fighter planes were attacking our cargo planes. So I was still flying co-pilot, and my pilot said he would go and asked me if I wanted to go, and I said sure. It's kind of boring around here. We only fly about one mission a week, and you'd be surprised in the military that you get very bored at times, and you'll volunteer for almost anything that would change the situation. So this time they said, we're going to give you a fighter plane escort. I took this picture myself, and those are P-40 fighter planes. There was, well, we flew 3 or 4 missions out of northeastern India, and different numbers of fighter planes accompanied us each time. But it was certainly comforting to see them out there. We were not attacked by the Japanese. Apparently, again, we had, in the Air Force, you call the element of surprise. We got in there, did our job, attacked some warehouses on the railroad, and got out of there before we were detected. And that's what you like to do when you're in the Air Force. Okay, as I say, I think we've knocked out every bridge in Burma, so they moved us up into China. And those are the buildings we lived in China. We were up at about 6,000 feet at altitude. It reminded me a lot of Big Bear Lake, where you have rarefied air and a lot of trees around. And of course, in airplanes, landing and takeoff characteristics are entirely different when you get up to 6,000 feet. It takes a lot longer to take off and a lot longer to land. But we had to get used to that. What I really liked about it, there were no snakes there, and there was no malaria, and we had fresh eggs for breakfast every morning, and boy, if you don't think that was really, really nice. We had pancakes that our Chinese cooks made for us. It was really pretty good. The mess sergeant would go out to the farms nearby and get chickens, and so the food was a whole lot better. But what we gained in living conditions, we lost in the danger of what we were doing. First of all, we wear those on our flight jackets. I brought along sample of the flight jacket that we wore. This is called an A2 jacket. And on the back of it, we wore that flag. And on the front of it, we had our squadron insignias. And that's the Chinese nationalist flag. And if I have time, I'll tell you a story about that, but I may not have time. Down below, there's a Chinese writing say, "I'm an American airman that's come to your country to help you chase the invaders out of your country, and if you help me get back to my lines, you'll be rewarded." Fortunately, I never bailed out. I never had to use that, but it was comforting to know that I had it. Okay, this is the kind of target that we went after in China and in, as I say, what is now Vietnam. This is attacking a bridge at a very low level. They wanted us to come in at a low level and do something called skip bombing, which means dropping our bombs into the side of a bridge rather than from the top to down. And as you can see, there's a lot of small arms fire that would be down there, a lot of machine guns shooting at us. And with the airplane flying about 250 miles an hour, which is about as much as we could do at that time, the chance it just seemed like when you're sitting up in the cockpit, it just seemed like you're almost standing still, with the people shooting at you having a pretty good chance of hitting you. And again, attacking a railroad line. Now that looks like a lot of fun, but believe me, you're pretty tense all the time. You're pretty tense all the time. It's not quite as much fun as it looks like, because you know they're shooting at you the whole time. Okay, another thing we did was to go after enemy airplanes on the ground. This was taken at Chiang Mai, Thailand, which we could reach from our base. Some of you have traveled to Chiang Mai. A lot of tourists go there. And we heard that the Japanese were planning an air raid against our area the next day, so we sent a flight of about 9 B-25s in there. Came in late at night. Again, we had the element of surprise. We snuck in there. We dropped bombs on the Japanese bombers on the ground, and you could see at least 2 of them burning right there. And it was considered a highly successful mission, although we did lose one of our 9 airplanes. It never returned. And the ones that did return were in pretty bad shape because they were shot up and things like hydraulic systems out so that you couldn't lower the landing gear and that sort of thing. Okay, during that first 3 months in China, as I say, we were flying under very hazardous conditions. Not only the enemy anti-aircraft fire, but the weather was bad. We had no navigational aids. Our maps were not all that accurate. And we ended up by losing